Richard the Night Stalker Ramirez was convicted of some of the most brutal murders the state of California had ever seen. In the mid-1980s, he bludgeoned, shot and stabbed to death 13 victims and left dozens more with life-changing injuries. Ramirez was true evil, a type of serial killer the world had not seen before. Since his arrest, many have been left wondering how this shy and quiet boy from El Paso, Texas, became the demon we know of today. In this video, we are going to introduce you to Cousin Mike, the cousin of Ramirez, who taught him how to sneak into homes, how to torture women, and how to kill. My name is Merryweather, the founder of Crime Viral Online, and today I'll be doing what I do best, which is talking about serial killers. Before we look at the real story of Richard Ramirez and Cousin Mike, here is a special treat for all you true crime fans. Magellan TV is a new type of documentary streaming membership founded by filmmakers. Their team of producers and curators brings together premium content that dives deep into important documentary subjects. Magellan TV has some of the best collections available in true crime, history, science, nature, and space. There are so many great choices, it's hard to stop watching once you start. There are over 3,000 documentaries to choose from, and new programs are added on a weekly basis. Even better, there's a growing selection of shows available in 4K without additional cost. You can watch Magellan TV on any device or connected TV. You can even cast from your phone to your TV. It's super easy to use. So check it out now. Click the link below to get a full month free. I've just finished watching Arctic Manhunt, Hunt for the Mad Trapper, which details the true story of how in 1931, this stranger who seemed to appear from nowhere in the Canadian Arctic went on a crime spree of murder and theft. The efforts to capture him became a media circus. It's really gripping viewing. I'd recommend you start binge watching Magellan TV. Best of all, no ads, no commercial interruptions. Now let's get you back to the serial killers. On February 29, 1960, Richard Ramirez was the youngest sibling born into a working-class family in El Paso, Texas. His father, Julian, and mother, Mercedes, were both Mexican, but Mercedes was born in Colorado, so she had American citizenship, and they were able to secure a home in El Paso where they could raise their family. Richard had 3 older brothers, Reuben, Joseph, and Robert, and a sister named Ruth. Richard was a lovely, happy baby who quickly became his sister's personal doll. She would dress him up and carry him around, and the family would laugh whenever the radio played music, as a young Richard would dance along to all the songs. Then, when Richard was 2 years old, he tried to climb up onto a dresser table, which fell over and landed on top of him. It is believed that the toddler was unconscious for around 15 minutes before he was rushed to the hospital, where more than 30 stitches were needed to close the wound on his forehead. There is one alarming factor that many notorious serial killers have in common, and that's head injuries as children. Damage to the frontal cortex of the brain can result in drastic changes in behavior, aggression, and impaired moral judgment. We have another video on this channel all about serial killers and head injuries, if you would like to check that out too. So Richard grew into a hyperactive child, and later he was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. His sister Ruth said, "My brother never slept. He was always up and moving around at night." Richard's father, Julian, was also known for his violent rages and serious self-harm. In childhood, the siblings recalled their father was unable to install the sink in the kitchen, so he became frustrated that he could not get it fixed to the drain pipe. Julian stood up in front of his children and in a fit of rage took a hammer and began hitting himself in the head so hard that blood eventually ran down his face. This was not the only incident in their childhood where they witnessed this kind of behavior from their father. Julian was also known to get so angry that he would repeatedly smash his own head into a wall until he was knocked unconscious. Often, a young Richard would sleep in a local cemetery to get away from his father's temper. So we have this traumatic upbringing mixed with a serious head injury. Then there was another factor that played a huge role in Richard's upbringing, and that was the influence of his cousin Mike. When Richard was 12 years old, his cousin Mike returned home from the Vietnam War. He had 4 medals and was considered a hero, as at one point his platoon of 20 men were surrounded, and Mike and the other soldier were the only 2 to make it out alive. It is undetermined if Mike was a psychopath who went to war or a guy who went to war and returned a sociopath, but either way, Mike loved that in Vietnam he could take out all his anger and aggression on the Vietnamese prisoners, as it was considered his duty. Cousin Mike had learned that the Vietnamese people were superstitious, and if they lost a body part, they would not go to heaven. So Mike took great sadistic pleasure in mutilating the bodies of the prisoners he captured. He had a collection of Polaroids that showed this mutilation of the prisoners and also the attacks on many women. He also had another collection of 8 shrunken heads and said that he used these as pillows to sleep on in Vietnam. He showed all of these photos and the shrunken heads to 12-year-old Richard, and it was at that exact turning point in Richard's life that he felt drawn to this kind of brutality. He had this confident and domineering cousin who he looked up to as a hero, and someone who could do no wrong in his eyes. Mike told Richard, having power over life and death was a high, an incredible rush. It was godlike. You controlled who lived and who died. Richard's parents were deeply religious and had always attended church. They believed in God and would teach their children how to be good according to the Bible. When a young Richard was feeling excited and also aroused at these images of brutality and torture, he felt guilty, as if it was against the teachings of the good Lord. So this was also when he started exploring Satanism, as it made him feel less guilty having these dark thoughts and feelings because, well, at least Satan would approve. Mike also taught Richard jungle warfare, how to be invisible, how to kill with stealth, and how to burglarize homes. Mike told Richard, it's us, the poor and downtrodden against them, the rich and influential. It can, of course, be assumed that Richard used these techniques later when he became the Night Stalker in Los Angeles and would break into people's homes in affluent neighborhoods whilst under the cover of darkness and dressed in all black. Cousin Mike was married to a woman named Jessie, and they had 2 sons together. Mike had received no counselling when he returned home from the war, and he had no sense of direction in life. All he wanted to do was drive around in his car all day, telling his young cousin gruesome war stories whilst they both smoked pot together. When a now 13-year-old Richard went to visit Mike at his apartment, he witnessed his cousin raise a pistol and shoot his wife right in the face at point-blank range. It was the first time Richard had ever seen someone killed in front of him. Mike warned Richard not to tell anyone he had been a witness to this murder. So when Richard returned home, he was very distressed and upset about the murder itself, although he sat at the dinner table with his family as if nothing had happened at all, keeping this secret to himself. It wasn't long before Mike was arrested and sent to jail. Later at his trial, the jury was sympathetic because Mike was considered a war hero. So they found him not guilty by reason of insanity, and he was committed to a mental institution. Richard's father, Julian, who was Mike's biological uncle, went to the apartment where Jessie had been killed to clean up the blood, and he took a young Richard along with him. This was another huge turning point in Richard's life. He later said, that day when I went back to the apartment, it was like some kind of mystical experience. You could smell the dried blood. I looked at the place where Jessie had fallen and died, and I got this kind of tingly feeling. The full picture of the deadly influence cousin Mike had on Richard's life is quite clear to see. He has embedded in his young and impressionable mind that brutality and violence is okay if it's considered duty. Later, Ramirez believed it was his duty as a follower of Satan to carry out these murders. He believed that rape, torture, mutilation, and murder gives you a godlike feeling, that keeping dark secrets and dark thoughts to yourself is okay, and that it's the poor versus the rich. Following the murder of Jesse, Richard should have sought counselling for what he had seen. And with cousin Mike now institutionalised, there was still a good chance that the young boy could have made his way back onto the good path. However, we can now see from his crimes that Mike's influence had lasted long into Richard's adult life, and this had fatal results. Everyone has that one cousin who's always up to no good, but if you have someone like cousin Mike in your life, then just run the hell away from him. The majority of this research comes from the outstanding book The Night Stalker, The Life and Crimes of Richard Ramirez by one of my favourite true crime authors of all time, Philip Carlo. Highly recommended if you don't want to sleep well at night. Don't forget to check out the other videos on this channel, and also like, subscribe and comment below with any future suggestions for our next videos.